Amamira Thompson had learned to pass unnoticed long before she set foot in Harvard. Her life since she was a child had tissue in the margins, helping his mother in cleaning, attending public schools with meager budgets, and dreaming secretly with a world that in theory was not made for her. When Gotti employment night as cleaning staff in Jefferson Hall, he didn't think it would be any different. Every night, he walked around the marble hallways with his cart squeaky and its worn mop, breathing in the smell of old paper, cold coffee and chalk. At that hour, Harvard was another thing, a quiet, empty place of the arrogant bustle of the days. The routine, wrapped like a cloak. It rose and fell stairs, emptied trash cans full of napkins with half-baked formulas writing, cleaned forgotten coffee stains in desks. Sometimes, while rubbed a table or erased a blackboard, he read fragments of equations or class notes that awakened in she an ancient spark, a hunger to understand, but immediately shook the head, remembering his sight, clean, don't question. Every night was the same as the last. Until one Tuesday at 2:17 a.m., while I was finishing cleaning classroom 324, his eyes stopped into something he couldn't ignore. About him, blackboard, under the dim light from a forgotten lamp, an equation was displayed, complex, beautiful, and at the same time unfinished. Amamira let him mop to one side, as if something in his interior, something long silenced, had suddenly awakened. He approached slowly, with his heart rumbling in the chest, and reviewed with the look at the symbols and numbers that seemed almost whisper to him. Without thinking about it too much, he took a piece of chalk that someone there was left fall in the lower tray and, trembling slightly, corrected a small part of the calculation. It was a detail, a subtle adjustment, but one that completely changed the direction of the formula. If you ever felt that your dreams were too big for you, reality, maybe this story touched you. Stay and share this moment. Didn't know how much time was there, hypnotized by the blackboard. It was the voice of the Professor Elijah Wren, the one that the did startled. "Who are you?" he asked, not harshly, but with a curiosity genuine than Amamira you. It seemed to anchor in middle of his panic. She turned around, cowering, expecting immediate dismissal or, worse still, a public humiliation. But Wren did not raise the voice nor asked angry explanations. He walked toward the blackboard. He observed the change that she there was done, and then he just smiled sideways. "Interesting," he murmured. "That moment, brief and full of possibilities, would change the course of your life forever." Amamira barely managed to lower her gaze, face burning with shame. He grabbed his mop like someone holding onto a board half of the shipwreck and muttered a broken apology. Elijah Wren, however, did not move. He watched blackboard, as if he had just discovered a gem buried in the dust of everyday life. "Are you interested? Theoretical mathematics?" he asked. Then, like who offers a helping hand to someone who didn't know they could be rescued? Amamira, unable to hold on the look, nodded almost imperceptibly. Nothing more was needed. Wren. He understood that in front of him there was much more than a worker nocturnal. There was a brilliant mind trapped after years of invisibility. During the nights following, Elijah Wren began to appear in Jefferson Hall at unusual hours. He never interrupted his work, but left open incomplete formulas in strategy boards or forgotten textbooks on the desks. Amamira, at first, thought it was a coincidence, a strange game of fate. But he soon understood that it was a silent invitation, a way of saying, "I see you. I know what you are capable of." So, while the world was sleeping, she began to study secretly, stealing minutes from his exhausting cleaning shift to feed a dream that he hardly dared to name. Amamira began to carry a notebook hidden in a cleaning cart. There copied the formulas, he wrote down doubts, and worked out solutions during the breaks that he used to spend sitting and resting his legs. Each written page was a small rebellion against the fate that had been assigned. He did not told anyone. "I knew that in a place like Harvard, where the appearances were worth so much, no one would take in seriously to a woman who entered through the service door, let alone a cleaning lady. Even so, every night, under the fluorescence blinking of the hallways empty, Amamira allowed herself he daring to learn. Have you ever had to fight silently for something? In what did you believe? Tell us in the comments. Your story also matters. Lack of sleep began to happen to him in voice. During the day, I could barely manage wake up in the small shared apartments where she lived. Her roommates, unaware of her secret struggle, assumed she was just another of the many exhausted workers. No one I asked, and Amamira, I preferred it to be so. Every aching muscle, every yawn uncontrollable, was the price that was willing to pay. In his heart, he knew this was his only chance, perhaps the last one. What for others was a luxury inherited, for her it was a race against time, a silent struggle to change their destiny before the forces or life itself is taken away, will escape from the hands. Nights. Later, the Elijah Wren. He left more than just a book or an equation. He left a note. It was brief, written in confident handwriting. If you ever decide to study formally, I will be your first recommendation. Amamira felt the floor move beneath his feet. He didn't know there was told anyone, but for months I had been investigating secretly the requirements for officially entering Harvard. Every web page he read, every admissions form he downloaded, seemed more intimidating than the previous one. The rates, letters of recommendation, exams standardized. Everything seemed built to keep it outside. But that, a short note, simple and direct, lit a flame that could not be extinguished. From then on, his routine changed. In addition to his job night, he dedicated himself to studying for the entrance exams. He bought second-hand books, downloaded free guides, memorized words in academic English that until then you were foreign. Harvard did not offer concessions, and she neither was looking for shortcuts. Every formula he solved, every text he read, until the letters fell into place. Mixed in the view, it was an act of resistance. He knew that his presence in these corridors were tolerated only in quality of shadow, of invisible figure that cleaned and disappeared before the day began. But in her mind, Amamira, it was already visible touring those themselves hallways with books under the arm, not with a mop in the hand. The first attempts were discouraging. It failed in several practice exams, and the self-criticism that followed years of farming became an enemy relentless. "Who do you think you are?" he muttered, his mind tired every time he committed an error. There was nights in those who, after finishing their shift, sat alone in a bench on campus and let the tears flow. They ran silently through the cheeks. Nobody the eye saw. Nobody I suspected that, beneath that uniform stained with cleaning products, there was a woman, waging a fierce battle against the fear, the doubt and fatigue. But always, after crying, he would get up. Always I tried again. With time, small victories began to accumulate. A math question that solved without errors. A writing in English that did not require corrections older. Each achievement was tiny to the world, but gigantic to Amamira. She didn't seek recognition. I just wanted a legitimate opportunity, a chance to walk as equals with those who, until then, barely noticed in his existence. Elijah Wren, true to his word, continued supporting her from the shadows, never pressed, never asked more than necessary. Your silent respect was, for Amamira, the most powerful impulse she could receive. Someone in that world of elites believed in she. When arrived he day to send your official request, Amamira felt that he were trembling hands. He checked he form over and over again, fearing to make a mistake, minimal error that would invalidate all your effort. In the end, with a shaky sigh, pressed he submit button and stared at the screen in white as if waiting for something magical to happen. But nothing happened. There was no fires artificial, not a feeling of relief immediate. Only the heavy certainty that there was done everything that was in her hands. The rest was no longer up to her. That night, While I was scrubbing the floors of Jefferson Hall, every tile seemed heavier, as if the building whole shared his uncertainty. Weeks passed, without news. Every email that arrived without being from admissions, he was a little dagger of disappointment. Meanwhile, the job continued the same. The same spots, the themselves hallways endless, the same silence as always. Amamira learned to carry his hope like who carries a secret wound, concealing it under layers of routine. He didn't want to get excited in vain. He had experienced too many disappointments to allow himself to dream without reservation. However, every time I passed by a brightly lit classroom, couldn't help but stop a second, imagining, though out in silence, that someday would be there not as an anonymous spectator, but as a legitimate part of that world. One afternoon, while Amamira folded uniforms in the small laundry community of your building, rang his phone. The number was unknown. He hesitated for a few seconds before answering, heart already accelerated by a feeling inexplicable. On the other end of the line, a formal voice introduced itself as part of the Harvard Admissions Committee. The woman, he spoke quickly, mentioning dates, documents, requirements. Amamira could barely follow the thread of the conversation, only heard clearly when they said, "It has been accepted in our applied mathematics program. Congratulations." The clothes clean fell from his hands, and for a moment the whole world, it seemed, stop. Didn't scream, he didn't cry in that moment. He just left fall in a plastic chair, breathing heavily, as if he had run a marathon invisible. It took a while, several minutes in react, in understanding that he was not dreaming. I had entered. I had managed to cross that barrier that for years you had seemed insurmountable, but the happiness came accompanied by a wave of brutal fear. How would pay? How would face the prejudices? Would it be able to sustain itself in an environment that, until then, had considered part of the furniture invisible, closed the eyes and thought in his eye as a child, in that small Amamira who dreamed secretly while I was scrubbing soils with his mother? For her, for all the versions of themselves same that they had resisted, knew that they had to try it. The first one's days as an official Harvard student were a trial by fire. Amamira felt every inquisitive look, every whisper behind his back when they noticed his age, your modest clothing, her silent way of occupying the space. In a sea of young people dressed in luxury brands and technological backpacks, she was moving forward with his notebook with worn covers and a pen common. He didn't belong to that world, not yet, but he had learned in the years of invisibility, not allowing the discomfort the one. He smiled little, spoke even less, and absorbed everything like a sponge. Every class, every book, every opportunity to learn. There were moments of doubt, brutal. The differences were not only economic or social, they were academics. Many of their classmates, they came from private schools where they had taught to think in advanced formulas since they were children. For Amamira, some concepts were new territories that he had to conquer through hours stolen from sleep and fatigue. But also, there was something in she who could not teach, a fierce determination, a resilience cultivated in years of work, in silence while others, they shone. Every time I doubted, I remembered those nights cleaning blackboards, that one first corrected formula, and continued forward. One afternoon, after finishing a particularly difficult class, Amamira was approached by a group of colleagues. It was not a common occurrence. For weeks, she had been a silent specter in the classrooms, someone who came in, took notes, and left without saying a word. This time, however, a girl with curly hair and thick glasses approached him, came closer. "Are you Amamira Thompson?" he asked, with a shy smile. Amamira nodded, suspiciously. "The Professor Wren told us about you. He said if we ever needed help to understand certain theorems, we should ask you, Amamira." She blinked, stunned. For the first time, she wasn't seen as an anomaly, not as a rarity, but as someone capable, someone worthy of academic respect. That small gesture changed something in her, not immediately but deeply. She began to stay a few minutes after class, answering questions, discussing ideas, allowing themselves to be part of an environment that for so long had felt alien. With some students, they began to look for her to form study groups. Sometimes even you assaulted the insecurity, the fear of not being up to par, of making a mistake error, that the return to the corner from which it came. But every conversation, every problem solved overall, it was a more brick in the construction of its new identity, that of a true academic. If you got here, it's because something about this story resonates in you. Help us so that more people know. Share this story. It was not easy to balance his responsibilities. He continued working some nights to be able to afford their minimal life in Cambridge. That meant that while his colleagues studied frescoes after hours of rest, she attended classes with deep, dark circles under the eyes and hands, chapped by cleaning chemicals. Many times felt that his body would not resist. Muscle pain, headaches, a fatigue that stuck to the bones. But his mind, trained in the resistance, the eye remembered that every sacrifice had a purpose. Every sunrise cold that they found still studying was a step closer to something that, in other time, would have seemed unattainable. Some teachers, like Elijah Wren, knew of his history. Others simply treated her like any other student, which was a blessing for Amamira. She didn't want concessions, neither compassion. I wanted to be measured with the same yardstick as the others. Little by little, their grades began to reflect his effort. Not always shone in. Everything but his tenacity that made it stand out in the more difficult projects. Your name began to sound in small but important circles, in recommendations for research assistants, in discreet invitations to conferences, student achievements. For Amamira, each of these achievements was a silent victory, a letter that she rewrote the narrative that others had written about her without meet her. One day, while I was reviewing some notes in the cafe from the campus, overheard a conversation that froze in his seat. Two students. They were commenting on the lady who had gotten into Harvard cleaning floors. They laughed, not with explicit evil, but yes, with that condescension that hurts more than open contempt. Amamira felt how is it formed a knot in the throat. I knew that his history began to circulate, stripped of nuances, converted into anecdote of overcoming to inspire or entertain. For a few seconds, he wished he was invisible. Once again, he wished he could erase himself from that simplistic story that didn't make sense. Justice to all that there was suffered and fought. But then, respite, deep, closed his notebook and forced himself to smile. He wouldn't allow others to find its value nor his story. She wasn't a caricature, nor a motivational come-from-behind story. She was a scholar, a thinker, a woman who had fought for every inch of her life, space. And although it hurt, although had to continue demonstrating his worth at every step, there was something that no one could take away, never. She had opened his own path in a world that had not been designed to receive her. Every night awake, every tear hidden, every formula resolved, silently was part of a victory that only she understood in his real magnitude. With the time, its presence in classrooms ceased to be a rarity. His classmates. They learned to see it not as an exception, picturesque, but as an equal. They began to ask her his opinion in debates, to invite her to group projects, to recognize in she a solid and respected voice. Amamira, although continued charging the invisible burden of his origin, began to be allowed small gestures of belonging. A shared cup of coffee after class, a conversation spontaneous on mathematical theories in the hallways. I wasn't looking for approval, but finding sincere camaraderie was a gift he never took for granted. During an internal Harvard conference, he was offered the opportunity to present one of his research projects as a student. The event, although modest in comparison with the Great Symposia International, represented for her a monumental moment. He prepared his exposure with the same care with the one who used to clean the floors. with meticulous attention, absolute respect for the work, and a silent passion for doing things are going well. When climbed onto the little one podium and saw the rows of attentive faces, he felt a vertigo of the past and present colliding inside her. She wasn't an imposter. She wasn't there by chance. Every word he spoke, every formula he explained, was a living affirmation that he had conquered his right to be in that scenery. At the end of your presentation, there was a brief moment of silence, followed by applause that began timidly but soon filled the room. Amamira lowered the gaze, overwhelmed by the emotion, but also by the certainty that beyond of the recognition had achieved something even more important. He had broken the internal barrier that for years there was made me feel less. They didn't matter, the murmurs, the stories distorted or prejudices that still could face. That applause wasn't just for one student, it was for every night of exhaustion, for every hidden sacrifice, for every dream that had silently survived. That night, walking back to his small apartment, Amamira felt the cold air of Cambridge like a caress on her face. He was not wearing luxury books, neither clothes expensive, but his backpack was loaded with something much more valuable: knowledge, dignity, and a history that already nobody could snatch from him. As he passed Jefferson Hall, he stopped a moment. He observed the imposing columns, the illuminated windows, and remembered the first time I had crossed that building pushing a cleaning cart. He smiled, not with nostalgia, but with gratitude serene. I hadn't forgotten where I came from. Every step he took toward forward was anchored in the firmness of its roots. As they progressed the semesters, Amamira began to consider a new horizon. I didn't just want to learn, but also to teach. I dreamed with being someday at the head of a class, helping others discover in mathematics the beauty that I saw, the same as there was sustained when everything seemed dark. I didn't want to be a teacher common. I wanted to be that kind of educator who looked beyond the appearances, which he recognized the potential in those to whom others overlooked. Every experience of his, every night invisible, every effort unseen, there was taught to value what many took for granted. His chance arrived sooner than expected. A Harvard peer tutoring program opened a call for applications, and one of its professors encouraged her to apply. Amamira hesitated. Despite his achievements, the insecurity continued being a persistent murmur in his mind. Who would want to learn from someone like her? But she remembered the nights that I would have given anything to have someone who believed in his capacity and presented his request. Weeks later, he received the answer. I had been accepted as a first-year tutor in basic mathematics. He held the letter in his hands with the same reverence with the one that once existed, sustained a piece of chalk under the dim light of Jefferson Hall. The first day as a tutor was almost as terrifying as his first class as a student. He sat on the edge of a chair in a small classroom, waiting for them to arrive, the students assigned. He was afraid that seeing her, older than them, dressed in clothes simple, they lost the interest or the will take less in serious. But when they entered the first, young, nervous and clumsy like her herself had felt some time ago, something in Amamira relaxed. She didn't need to pretend to be someone else. Her force was precisely in his authenticity, in his a true and unadorned story. With a calm voice, gave the welcome and began the session. From the beginning, its way of teaching it was different. It wasn't just about passing on formulas. It was about teaching us not to give up in the face of mistakes, to see problems as opportunities to think differently. The students, who at first they seemed suspicious, they soon found she was an unexpected ally. Amamira did not judge, nor was he impatient. He knew, better than anyone, that the learning true is born in the spaces where one feels seen and respected. Every question, no matter how basic, was received with a sincere smile. Without knowing it, Amamira was sowing in their students the same seed of hope that once someone had planted in she. The news of his unique mentoring style began to spread timidly by the Harvard halls. Some curious teachers came to observe their sessions. Other students, who were not officially assigned to her, began to ask permission to join. Amamira, although continued being discreet, she couldn't help feeling excited. It wasn't fame she was looking for, nor recognition's grandiloquent. It was something simpler and deeper, to demonstrate that the knowledge, when shared from the empathy, can open doors that neither the brightest intelligence could knock down alone. As the months passed, her makeshift classroom became a refuge for students of all kinds, brilliant but insecure, hardworking but lagging, curious but disoriented. Amamira. I remembered every face, every story. They were not just students, they were dreamers, just like her had been, and that now they found in that corner of Harvard a place where they could make mistakes, learn and grow without fear of judgment. Sometimes, seeing them animatedly discuss a complex problem or celebrate together a small achievement, Amamira felt that his path, painful, difficult, and sometimes lonely, had been worth every second. One rainy afternoon, while organizing her notes after a session, Amamira was surprised by Elijah Wren. The professor, with his usual discretion, he approached and handed over a sealed envelope. "I wanted it you would receive in person," he said simply. Amamira, confused, opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, he found an official letter from the university. They offered a position as a teaching assistant in the Department of Applied Mathematics. It was a huge step, a recognition that went beyond any tutoring. Her breath hitched. For a moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes and just feel the weight and the lightness of that unique moment. That night, while walked under the drizzle light that enveloped Cambridge, Amamira, he reflected on everything he had experienced. He thought in the times that there were doubted himself same, in the eternal mornings, scrubbing soils, while I dreamed impossible formulas, in the silences that there had to endure, when it seemed that nobody the eye saw. Now, every drop of rain it seemed like a blessing. It wasn't just about having reached a position at Harvard. It was something much bigger. He had shown that the dreams, even the ones more relegated to the background of the heart, they can find their path if you walk with dignity, persistence, and faith in oneself. Becoming teaching assistant meant new challenges. Now I had to prepare materials, correct exams, leading discussion groups. Each task was a mountain that, although intimidating, climbed with the same patience with the one that had traveled the hallways of Jefferson Hall years ago. It was not allowed to go down level of demand. He knew that, for many, his presence continued being an uncomfortable reminder that talent doesn't always permission in the expected packaging. And although it would hurt, too, he understood that changing mentalities required more than words. It required excellence sustained. In the beginning, there were students who questioned his authority. Some they looked with distrust, wondering in silence what made a woman like her in a position so coveted. But it only took a few weeks for his dedication, his clarity to explain complex concepts, and their genuine passion for the learning. They will speak louder than anyone prejudice. The comments began to change. "The best assistant that I have had explains better than many teachers." Amamira did not seek praise, but every positive word was a healing balm, the wounds invisible from so many years of forced silence. One day, while was walking across campus, carrying a stack of books, he came across with a former cleaning colleague. It was Marta, a woman I had shared with more than one dawn of silence's accomplices and brief conversations in the staff dining room. Seeing her, Marta stopped, open-mouthed, not knowing whether to approach her or not. Amamira smiled first, by relieving the tension, and in that gesture was woven a bridge between their two worlds. They embraced strong, without words, in half an aisle full of students who barely noticed the scene. For Amamira, that hug was one of the most important moments of your life, a silent recognition of his origin and everything it had overcome. That night, Sitting in his small apartment, Amamira, he reflected on how easy it would have been to renounce his past. There was who you had subtly suggested that he hide his history, which was reinvented as if had borne in half of the privilege and opportunities. But she had decided from the very beginning that I would never do it would do. His history was not a shame, it was his strength. Every scrubbed tile, every endless day, every closed door the face had forged the woman who now taught at Harvard. And if I ever had doubts, it was enough to remember hugs like Marta's to know that the real triumph was never having forgotten who was. With the time, Amamira was invited to participate in a panel on academic diversity and inclusion. At the beginning, she hesitated. She did not want to be reduced to a symbol, nor did she want her history was used as a trophy of a system that in many aspects he continued being exclusive, but then understood that his voice could open doors for others, that his testimony was not only his, so he accepted. The day of the event, in front of a packed auditorium, spoke calmly and honestly. He did not sugarcoat your experience nor minimize the difficulties. He told his truth, the weight of the invisibility, the tiredness, the loneliness, but also the strength that he had found in same. His speech was not received with tears nor with theatrical ovations. It was received with something deeper, a silence full of respect. When finished, some people approached timidly to thank him. Among them there was first-class students' generation, workers from the campus, young people who had never felt represented in that space. For them, Amamira was not just an inspiration, she was living proof that although the paths be hard and the walls high, it is possible to cross them without giving up on oneself. That night, upon arriving home, Amamira, he understood that his history there was stopped being just his. Now it was part of something bigger. After the panel, the university formally proposed to dictate an introductory course in applied mathematics for first-year students. It was a huge opportunity, and Amamira the accepted with humility, but also with a silent determination. He prepared your study program as someone who builds a bridge, solid, accessible, designed to include and not exclude. I wasn't looking for impress with empty technicalities. He wanted his students to discover the power of mathematics to solve real problems, to think critically, to imagine better worlds. The first day of school, when he entered the classroom and saw dozens of faces, youths looking at her, he felt a little shaking in hands. But when he opened his notebook and started talking, the trembling faded. Each explanation flowed with the naturalness of whom he has experienced each concept firsthand. He didn't just teach formulas, he taught perseverance, curiosity, respect for the knowledge. Some students were surprised to discover that their teacher had been a cleaning worker in that same campus. But instead of diminishing his authority, that revelation the raised even more so in their eyes, because they understood that before them was not just an academic, there was a teacher of life. As the semesters passed, his course became one of the most sought after in the entire department. It wasn't because it was easy. On the contrary, Amamira demanded a lot, but it offered something that few they knew how to give, a faith unwavering in which each student, regardless of their origin or initial level, could arrive far away if you know it. He proposed. Sometimes, after classes, he would stay for hours, solving doubts, organizing reinforcement sessions, writing letters of recommendation for those who previously doubted even their right to dream. Every gesture was an echo of the silent help that a day received and now gave back, multiplied. Do you know someone who needs to be reminded that their dreams are possible? Send him this story. In her office, next to the piles of books and papers, Amamira placed a very special object, your old key card from when I was a cleaning lady. Not like a relic of the past, difficult, but as a constant reminder of your true journey. Every time I had a hard day, every time I felt the weight of expectations or criticism, looked that card and remembered I had crossed those hallways when nobody the eye saw, when I only had a mop and a hidden dream. Now he crossed the themselves hallways as a teacher, and not because someone you had made a favor, but because it had conquered with his own effort. One day, while Amamira was walking across campus, she was approached by a shy young woman carrying a folder full of notes. "Professor Thompson," she said nervously, "do you think I could help me? I'm thinking about apply, but I don't know." "Yeah, I am." "Enough, Amamira." He smiled, recognizing himself in those eyes full of doubt. He invited the young man to sit down in a nearby bank and for hours listened his history, their fears, their dreams. Don't offered false guarantees, neither paths easy. Just said the truth, that the world is sometimes cruel, that doors do. Not always open by themselves, but whoever persists, whoever does not give up on their dignity, can rewrite your destiny. That conversation became an unexpected routine. Every week, new students, some with worn backpacks, others with looks full of questions, arrived at his door looking for more than academic help. They were looking permission to believe in themselves. Amamira never rejected anyone, not because it was not easy, even if I didn't have others' obligations, but because he knew in it deeper in his soul that every gesture of support, it could be the spark that ignites a whole life. So, without great proclamations, neither heroic acts, was leaving a silent but indelible mark in generations of dreamers. Years later, during a graduation ceremony, Amamira was invited to give the keynote address. As she took the stage, she noticed the sea of caps and gowns in front of her, and she felt a knot in the throat. He thought in all the way I had traveled to get there, the empty corridors, the night's endless, hidden tears. He breathed deep and spoke, not from the perfection, but from the truth. He told his history as it had been, without embellishment, without drama. He spoke of the fears, of the failures, of the small everyday victories. And above all, he spoke of the dignity of walking his own path, even when nobody else believes you can do it. His words were not seeking impress. They sought to touch something deep in each person they met. I was listening. When ended, there was no an immediate round of applause. There was silence, a dense silence, full of respect, of admiration genuine. Then, yes, the audience exploded in applause, in cheers that resounded like a wave unstoppable. But for Amamira, the most important thing was not public recognition. It was to see in the faces of the young people that particular brilliance, the spark of someone understands that his history is yet to be written and has right to dream in a big way without asking permission. After that ceremony, received numerous offers, invitations to give lectures, proposals to write books, recognition that would have previously seemed unattainable. But Amamira chose carefully. I didn't want to become into a decorative figure of inclusion for institutions that, in the background, they continued without changing. I preferred to continue working in the classroom, where the transformations royal occurred silently, one mind and one heart at a time. I knew that the real change was not there in the showcases, nor in the pretty speeches, but in the small acts of everyday faith, in the patient sowing that does not always receive immediate applause. Among his projects most beloved, he promoted a mentoring program for workers from the campus they wanted study but didn't know where to start. He remembered all too well what it was like to look at the academic world from the outside, feeling that it was a territory forbidden. Every talk and every workshop was an act of intimate reparation, a message sent to the past. We are not alone. Yes, it is possible. And every time one of those workers I entered a study program, Amamira, I felt like it was closing a circle, which returned a little bit of the hope that a day someone had deposited in she with a simple note in a chalkboard. Despite the years and accumulated achievements, Amamira never stopped being who she was in essence, a woman who was walking slowly, who listened more than he spoke, who continued observing the blackboard strangers with the same reverent curiosity of that first night. He never forgot that the knowledge was not the property of a few, but a heritage that should be shared. Therefore, Although you offered prestigious administrative positions, he preferred to remain in the classroom, in direct contact with the students, in that humble space where the true silent revolutions were taking shape. In his classes, he insisted in a principle simple but powerful. It doesn't matter where you come from, nor how many times beaches failed. What matters is what you are willing to build today. That phrase, repeated hundreds of times, became in a kind of mantra for his students. Many of them, years afterwards, they would return to look for her, now converted into scientists, teachers, engineers, to thank her not only for what she had told them taught in academic terms, but what he transmitted about life. Radical and profoundly transformative idea that all of us, absolutely all of us, have right to try. Autumn afternoon, while walked among the trees golden of the campus, Amamira stopped in front of a newly installed plaque. There, in discreet letters, it read, "In honor of Amamira Thompson, who she crossed these doors as a worker and as a teacher, reminding us that the knowledge belongs to all who dare to seek it." When reading those words, he felt a wave of emotions so deep that he had to sit down on a nearby bench. He didn't cry. He just closed the eyes and let the cool breeze caress her face, like a silent embrace of the time, of life, of all the versions of themselves, same one that never gave up. That night, in his small apartment decorated with used books and humble souvenirs, Amamira wrote in his daily a simple sentence, "Today, I understood that I never walked alone." She thought in his mother, in Elijah Wren, in Martha, in every student who ever believed. In she was inspired by her example. Your history, understood so. It wasn't just his. It was a living testimony that the barriers visible and invisible can be crossed, that the dreams whispered in the darkness also have right to see the light. And that sometimes everything starts with an access card, a mop, and a dream that refuses to die. With the time, Amamira became into a reference figure not only for Harvard, but for thousands of young people who listened his history and dared to imagine new ones' possibilities for itself same. I received letters from everywhere of the world, messages of gratitude, stories of people who, inspired by his example, they decided apply to universities, resume abandoned studies, or simply believe that they deserved a place in spaces where before they only saw closed doors. Each letter I read, with the same modesty with which one day erased blackboards others, understanding that the true impact is not measured in titles nor in recognitions, but in lives silently touched. But Amamira never sought to be an icon. For her, the true triumph followed being to see a student grasp a difficult concept, seeing a worker from the campus register in his first class, see a shy young girl get up the hand in an audience full. Greatness, he had learned, was not in the scenarios, neither in the statues, but in the small acts of everyday faith. And so, while continued teaching, while continued learning, Amamira Thompson continued to cross doors, not for herself, but for all those who at one time believed that dreaming wasn't for people like them. On the last day of classes of that semester, Amamira was left alone for a few minutes in the empty classroom, closed the eyes, and heard the echo of his own walking on the wooden floor, the same sound as so many times there was accompanied her nights of anonymous cleaning. He smiled, recognizing in that echo not a shadow of the past, but a silent tribute to all that had been she to all that had built. I didn't need any more proof. There was arrived, not by accident, not by charity, but because his light, his effort, and his dignity thee had taken there. Before leaving, he left written in a corner of the blackboard a simple phrase, almost to himself same, "Some doors don't open, they go through." He turned off the lights, closed the door with softness, and went out into the cold of the Cambridge night with firm step and the heart in peace. Because Amamira Thompson had not only found her place in the world of the geniuses, there were redrawn that world for all who would come then, taking with him the "I remember that the dreams, when they hold with love and courage, they can rewrite any destination." If this story inspired you, don't let it stop here. Follow our path, comment, share, and keep this flame alive.